120 luxury homes popping up on your land like mushrooms after a spring storm, the HOA president, smirking like they have already won sleek lawyers in $1,000 suits, chuckling at what they think was your naive oversight. But they missed one tiny devastating detail. I'm a forensic accountant, and I've spent the last 15 years exposing property fraud down to the decimal. Before I tell you how I turned their greed into the most satisfying legal trap, they'll never forget. Tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I have a feeling your HOA horror stories are just as wild. Now back to my story. Every brick they laid. It wasn't a home, it was a cell in the prison they built for themselves. The day I returned from a 6-month consulting job in London, the Arizona sun greeted me like an old friend. Warm, familiar, deceptively calm. I'm Graham Jordan, 45, and ready to finally settle down on the 50 acres my Aunt Margaret left me. Peace, quiet, and wildflower fields just like I remembered. But as the Uber crept closer, the driver kept peeking at me through the rearview mirror. Sir, are you sure this is the right address? This looks like an entire new development. My heart dropped. Beige rooftops, identical polished lawns, row after row of HOA-approved boxes pretending to be homes. Where there should have been open desert, there were now 120 sparkling houses, standing smugly on my property. A pristine sign read, "Welcome to Emerald Heights," gold letters, manicured flower beds. It might as well have spit in my face. I paid the driver and walked straight into the sales office. Inside, a bubbly blonde realtor bounced to her feet. "Welcome to Emerald Heights. Interested in one of our Phase 2 homes? We're already 70% sold." I handed her my property deed, eyes cold. "I'm interested in knowing why there are houses on land I own." Her smile twitched but recovered like a pro. "Oh, you must be Mr. Jordan Melanie Ross. Our HOA president said you might have some confusion about the development agreement." Confusion. The sales office looked like a shrine to suburban delusion. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls plastered with blueprints of a golf course and country club planned for my future backyard. The realtor, Brittany, according to her name tag, clicked nervously on her keyboard. "Mrs. Ross said to send you right up when you arrived. Her office is on the second floor of the administration building." She gestured toward a gleaming structure of glass and chrome that looked more like the headquarters of a Fortune 500 company than an HOA building. As I walked toward it, cutting through streets that once belonged to me, my forensic accountant's instincts kicked in. My eyes scanned catalog noted, Sapphire Lane, Ruby Court, Diamond Drive, gems for street names, a shallow tribute to wealth. The home's uniform beige stucco boxes with only the faintest variations in trim, an illusion of individuality. The landscaping was unnaturally perfect, almost surgical. Not a single leaf dared to fall out of place. Joggers passed in coordinated activewear. Dog walkers smiled tight, artificial smiles. Every set of eyes tracked me like I was a trespasser. I was the outsider. On my own land, Melanie Ross's office was as calculated as the woman herself. It oozed status, polished mahogany minimalist leather, and civic plaques hung with intention. Behind her, a law degree from Stanford loomed like a warning. She was 52 with silver hair so deliberately styled it felt like armor. And her smile, the kind you see right before a knife slips between your ribs. "Graham, so glad you could finally join us," she said, her voice a purr dipped in condescension. She slid a heavy folder across the desk. "As you'll see, we sent multiple notices to your registered address regarding the development. When we received no reply, we acted according to the HOA bylaws your aunt agreed to when Emerald Heights was formed. 1998, she opened the folder, pages and pages of legalese, stamped, notarized, copied, sealed, certified mail receipts, public notices. Everything was done by the book, she added, with the smugness of someone who believes the book will always protect her registered address. Or I asked, flipping through the documents. And then I saw it. My stomach turned. 1223. Maple Drive, my aunt's old home, demolished 2 years ago. Vacant, erased. Every certified letter showed the same result. Delivery attempted, address not found. Melanie's eyes gleamed. "The address on file with the HOA," she said smoothly. "We followed protocol. Every notice, every deadline, every opportunity to object sent right there." She leaned back in her leather chair, a predator posturing after the kill. "I understand this might be overwhelming," she continued, "but the development is a fait accompli. Perhaps we can discuss compensation for your cooperation." I watched her closely, a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth. A tell I'd seen it in hundreds of depositions. Liars wore masks, but even masks cracked under pressure. You knew that address wasn't valid, I said softly. Her smile didn't waver. We're required to use the address on record. It's not our responsibility to track down negligent property owners who fail to update their contact information. She produced another document. My aunt's signature, an agreement from 1998 stating all official communications would be sent to the address of record. I stood slowly, keeping my expression neutral. Years of fraud investigations had taught me never to show your hand too early. I'll need time to review these documents with my attorney. Melanie's smile broadened teeth like polished daggers. Of course, but I should mention fighting. This will be expensive and futile. We're represented by Morrison Keller and Associates. You may have heard of them, I had. They were corporate legal war machines, famously brutal. Last year, they'd steamrolled 3 environmental groups into oblivion. As I stepped out of her office, I caught her whisper to her assistant, "He'll fold." They always do on the walk back. I paid closer attention, cameras. Every corner. A private security car making rounds. A gated entrance with a full-time guard. This wasn't just a community, it was a fortress, and like any fortress built on stolen land and false assumptions, it had a weak point, and I was going to find it. My aunt's 50 acres, once wild, open, and free, had become a sterile habitat, a curated life under control. Every blade of grass regulated, every shade of beige approved, every resident monitored. I stopped at what used to be her favorite spot, the old oak tree where she'd hung wind chimes and watched the sunset in silence. It was gone, in its place now stood a decorative fountain ringed by sterile benches bolted into concrete beauty, engineered for compliance, not peace. That night in my hotel room, I did what I did best, surrounded by legal documents in the soft glow of my laptop. I followed the money. Something about Melanie Ross didn't sit right. It wasn't just arrogance, it was certainty, the kind that came from experience, the kind that came from getting away with something more than once. So I dug. And within hours, I struck my first vein of gold. Melanie Ross, formerly Melanie Ross Hutchinson, bar registration suspended in 2016. Cause conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation? Well. The mask was slipping and I hadn't even touched the HOA's financials yet. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number, heard you're back in town. If you want the real story about Emerald Heights, meet me at Java Junction tomorrow at 10 a.m. A friend. I stared at the message, then smiled. In my line of work, a friend usually meant one of two things: someone with a guilty conscience or someone with a vendetta. Either way, they usually had the best intel. I'll be there, I replied, then went right back to work. By 3:00 a.m., I had mapped out 15 other properties swallowed by Emerald Heights in the past 5 years. The pattern was unmistakable. Elderly owners, out-of-state heirs, official notices, always sent to outdated addresses. This wasn't coincidence. It was a methodology, a machine, and Melanie was the engineer. Java Junction was the kind of coffee shop that hadn't changed in 30 years. Linoleum floors, worn leather booths, a chalkboard menu. Locals swapped gossip over drip coffee, refills, and microwave muffins. It was the perfect place to talk, in plain sight, just far enough from Emerald Heights to stay off camera, but busy enough to vanish into the crowd. I arrived early, black coffee in hand, and claimed a booth with a view of the entrance. At exactly 10:01 a.m., she walked in, a young woman in a crisp navy suit scanning the room like someone constantly looking over her shoulder. When our eyes met, she gave a subtle nod and made her way over. "Mr. Jordan, I'm Allison West. I think I can help you with your situation." She slid into the booth across from me. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her briefcase. Under the professional polished concealer, perfect posture. I saw it. She was exhausted. "I used to work for Melanie," she began softly. "Right out of law school, I thought I'd made it working for this brilliant, respected attorney. She was everything I wanted to be." Her voice faltered. Then she opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside, organized chaos. Spreadsheets, emails, internal memos, financial statements, handwritten notes. That's when I found out what Emerald Heights really was. Her tone hardened. "It's not just a homeowners association, it's a scheme. A sophisticated predatory property acquisition operation. Melanie finds vulnerable landowners, mostly elderly, and uses obscure HOA bylaws to claim jurisdiction. Once the land is absorbed, she partners with developers and flips it for millions." She flipped a page. "I noticed things 6 months in, properties added without consent, Residents signing papers they didn't understand, forged signatures. When I confronted Melanie, she laughed, said I was naive. That this is how business gets done in the real world? I leaned forward. Why tell me? Why not the authorities? Allison let out a short, bitter laugh. I did try. But Melanie's protected judges, city council members, even a few FBI contacts. When I threatened to go public, she had me blacklisted, said I was just a disgruntled former employee making false accusations. She paused, steadying her hands on the table. No law firm in 3 states will touch me now. She pushed the folder closer to me, but I kept everything, including proof that she knew your aunt had passed before she ever sent those notices. She slipped out a printed email dated 3 months before I received my first notice from the HOA. Look at this exchange, she said. Between Melanie and her assistant, I scanned it. The subject line was innocuous, Emerald Heights, Phase 2 timeline. But the content was damning. The old woman is dead. No need to worry about interference. Just send the notices to Maple Drive to cover our bases. Think of it like fishing in a dry pond. My grip tightened on the page, the casual cruelty, the smug audacity. This wasn't negligence. It was premeditated fraud. And then the rest of the folder. Email chains between Melanie and her developer partner, Jim, the Hammer, Harrison, expedite the process permits first cleanup, later. Push the sale timeline forward. Jordan still overseas. Offshore accounts have been topped off. Millions of dollars rerouted into shell corporations. Illegal wire transfers. It was all here, but what caught my eye was a dense technical report in the back of the folder. What's this about soil contamination? Allison smiled. For the first time that she said is your ace in the hole, she leaned in. Melanie was in such a hurry to break ground. She bypassed mandatory environmental remediation. That land was flagged years ago needs proper treatment before residential development. Every single permit was issued on fraudulent data. I blinked. If the land was contaminated, those houses were illegal. Every sale voidable, every permit invalid. There's more, she said, sliding out a final bundle of documents. Your aunt wasn't just some random target. My heart stopped. She'd been fighting Melanie for years in letters, dozens of them, some handwritten, some typed, to state regulators, to the State Bar Association, to real estate ethics boards. Even to a private investigator, I recognized my aunt's handwriting firm, precise. She hadn't gone quietly. She'd seen it coming and had built a case brick by brick. Over the next 2 hours, Allison walked me through the full operation. Step 1, identify absentee or deceased owners with valuable land. Step 2, send legally required notices to intentionally outdated addresses. Step 3, use the lack of response to trigger a charter clause from 1998 claiming abandonment rights. Step 4, transfer the parcel to Emerald Heights jurisdiction. Step 5, partner with Jim Harrison's development firm. Build fast, use cheap materials, skip inspections. Step 6, sell before anyone asks too many questions. They've done this 15 times, she said. But you're different. You have the skills to expose this. And more importantly, you came back before they could finish covering their tracks. She pulled out a color-coded timeline. Melanie usually waits at least a year before anyone catches on. By then, she sold most of the units, dispersed ownership, and made it impossible to unravel the web. But you showed up at 6 months. She's barely sold half. It's still reversible. That's why she's panicking. I stared at the timeline, at the stack of evidence. Everything in me screamed to act, but one question remained. Why should I trust you? I asked, narrowing my eyes. For all I know, this is just another setup. Allison didn't flinch. She looked me dead in the eye because I lost everything trying to stop her. My career, my reputation, and if I'm going to burn for it, she's going to burn with me. Allison's expression shifted, something between guilt and gravity. Because I'm the reason you inherited that land in the first place. I stared at her, stunned. Your aunt was my mentor in law school, she continued. She knew what Melanie was planning. She changed her will specifically to leave the property to someone who could fight back. Her voice softened. She always said you were the smartest one in the family, that you'd see what others missed. Allison reached into her briefcase and pulled out a letter folded, faded, handwritten. My breath caught as I recognized the script, Aunt Margaret. I opened it carefully. The ink blurred slightly with emotion. Dear Graham, if you're reading this, it means Melanie Ross has made her move. I've watched her circle like a vulture for years, waiting for me to die. The land isn't just property. It's evidence. Look beneath the old oak tree near the creek. I've buried something that will help you bring her down. Trust Allison? She's one of the good ones. Love, Aunt Margaret. Sharon's daughter. I folded the letter with reverence. Looks like we have some digging to do. But Allison wasn't done. There's something else, she said, her tone grave. Melanie's not working alone. She's part of a larger network across Nevada, New Mexico, Utah. The Emerald Heights model is just one of many. She paused, letting the weight of it settle. They're targeting retirement communities, exploiting property laws and HOA loopholes, wherever aging populations leave land vulnerable. Your aunt figured that out, and that's why she became such a threat. She wasn't just defending her land. She was trying to take down a multi-state criminal enterprise. That afternoon, Allison and I returned to the land with shovels and determination. Beneath the spot where my aunt's favorite oak once stood near the dry creek bed, we found it. A waterproof lockbox sealed tight inside. Original HOA documents, recorded conversations, a leather-bound diary documenting every suspicious activity, name date, and transaction. And the bombshell, a geological survey from 1997. Natural gas, vast deposits running beneath the acreage. Allison whispered, stunned, "That's why Melanie wants the land. It's not about houses, it's about mineral rights." She plans to sell to Excelsior Energy for $50 million when she has full control. That evening, I created a full timeline of Melanie's fraud. The pattern was undeniable. But I knew from experience patterns weren't enough in court. I needed admissible evidence, and I needed Melanie Ross to incriminate herself. That's when the idea struck Allison. I said, turning toward her, "How would you feel about playing double agent?" She raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" I outlined the plan. Allison would go to Melanie pretending she wanted back in that she could help manage the Graham Jordan problem. Meanwhile, I'd play the part of the overwhelmed heir, naive, shaken, ready to settle for pennies just to be done with it. The bait had to be irresistible. The next day, the HOA held an emergency meeting at the community center, a sleek glass and steel building that my aunt's stolen land had funded. The room was packed. Residents filled every chair, whispering and glaring at me like I was the villain. At the front, Melanie Ross, radiant in her charcoal power suit, took the podium. Her confidence oozed through every word. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she said smoothly. "As you know, we have a situation involving ownership claims made by Mr. Graham Jordan." She gestured toward me like I was an inconvenience, not a threat. "While we sympathize with his confusion, the fact remains that this development was built legally and in good faith." That was my cue. I stood deliberately hesitant, letting my voice tremble. "I just want what's fair." The room watched, believing they saw a man out of his depth. They had no idea they were watching a trap snap shut. I stood before the packed community center, clutching the letter from my aunt and a stack of legal documents. "My aunt left me this land," I said, letting my voice tremble just enough. "And now there are houses on it. I don't want to uproot families. But surely there's some compensation due." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some voices were sympathetic. Most were skeptical. Melanie's smile was polished, predatory. "Of course, Graham. We're prepared to offer you $200,000 for any residual claims you might have." "More than generous," she added, "considering this development was approved through proper channels." "200,000, I repeated softly, glancing down at my documents as though weighing the offer. Knowing full well the undeveloped land was worth over $5 million. Melanie's expression flickered just for a second. "Was worth Mr. Jordan?" she said, her voice sharpening. "Past tense. The situation has changed." That's when Jim Harrison rose from the front row. He was broad-shouldered, sun-kissed by country clubs, not job sites. "Look, buddy," he drawled, "you can take the offer or spend the next 10 years in court. Your choice." I let the tension hang. Then pulled out my phone before I decided. I said, "There's something everyone here should hear." I hit play. Melanie's voice filled the room through the speaker. Of course I knew the old bat was dead. That's why I sent the notices there. Graham Jordan was in London, probably sipping tea and eating crumpets. By the time he figured it out, we'd have everything locked down tight. The room exploded. Residents leapt from their seats, voices raised in anger and disbelief. Melanie's face drained of color. That's taken out of context," she stammered. "But I wasn't done. I also have copies of the real environmental reports. The ones Melanie suppressed? They show contamination levels 3 times the legal limit." Gasps filled the room. She hid those results from every single family who bought homes here. Jim Harrison tried to make a quiet escape out a side door, but found Connell Lewis, my childhood neighbor, and now a resident, blocking the way. I don't think so. Jim Connell said flatly. We all need to hear this. Melanie raised her voice, desperate to regain control. This is ridiculous. He fabricated those recordings. I'll be filing defamation charges first thing tomorrow. But the crowd was turning. And fast, I pulled out another set of documents. Speaking of legal issues, did anyone here know that HOA funds were used to cover Melanie's personal legal defense in 3 prior fraud cases? Eyes widened. Or that the construction company that built your homes has filed for bankruptcy twice under different names. The room descended into chaos. Melanie and Jim fled toward her office. Residents swarmed me. How deep does this go? Are our homes even safe? I chose my words carefully. I'm working with authorities to get to the bottom of this. Structurally, your homes are sound, but there are issues, I promise you. My fight isn't with any of you. It's with the people who defrauded all of us that night. Allison called Melanie spiraling. She's moving funds offshore, shredding documents, panicking. But here's the kicker. She called someone she referred to as the senator, told him things were getting out of control. I smiled grimly. Good panicked people make mistakes. What about our federal friends? Allison sounded almost giddy. That FBI agent you contacted? He's very interested. Turns out they've been tracking Jim Harrison for money laundering, but they couldn't connect him to Melanie. Until now. Then came the email from an anonymous address. Back off or things will get very unpleasant. You don't know who you're dealing with. Attached a photo of my house in Boston. I forwarded it straight to the FBI and texted Allison. Looks like we're rattling the right cages. Her reply was instant. Melanie just offered me $1 million to steal your evidence and disappear. Want me to take it? I laughed aloud. Absolutely. Let's see how she plans to pay you. And next morning, Melanie filed an emergency injunction. Her goal, stop me from harassing residents and spreading false information. But in her rush, she made a fatal mistake. She included financial documents that corroborated my claims. Her nervous young lawyer, Kevin Marsh, kept fidgeting with his tie as Judge Patricia Reeves flipped through the file. Counselor, she said coolly, did you actually read these attachments? Kevin turned crimson. Your Honor, we filed under extreme time pressure. My client was trying to protect the community. Judge Reeves interrupted. From what? From learning the truth. She held up a page, because what I'm looking at are bank statements showing systematic transfers from HOA funds to offshore entities. Is your client aware that financial disclosures in court filings are subject to perjury laws? Melanie, wide-eyed, whispered frantically to her new attorney, Richard Blackstone, the notorious real estate shark of Arizona. He rose smooth as ever, Your Honor, if I may. I'm stepping in to take over. There appears to be a misunderstanding regarding the scope of these documents. Mr. Blackstone, Judge Reeves snapped, these are now public record. What they show is financial misconduct that warrants immediate investigation. Behind the scenes, Melanie was scrambling. She'd rushed the sale of 80 out of 120 homes, shoving closings through in record time. But I let her, because every new buyer was another potential plaintiff. Every rushed transaction was another piece of evidence. Allison, still undercover, fed me updates in real time. That afternoon, I went to the county recorder's office with Patricia Newen, a forensic auditor I'd hired. She'd worked with the FBI on real estate fraud for years. As we pored over property records, Patricia whistled. Graham, this is worse than we thought. She pointed to a page. Same notary on all of these deeds, but their license expired 3 years ago. That means every single sale is legally questionable. I leaned in. And look at the timestamps. Every closing, they happened within a 72-hour window. We were watching an empire of fraud, collapsing in real time. No legitimate real estate operation processes this many sales. This fast, I muttered, scanning the documents again. Not without cutting corners, a lot of corners. Patricia nodded solemnly. This is classic fraudulent conveyance, she said. She's trying to flood the system with enough individual property claims that untangling them becomes legally impossible. It's an asset protection strategy, but so sloppy it's actually producing more evidence. Later that day at a secluded truck stop diner on the outskirts of town, Allison slid into the booth, eyes scanning the lot before she spoke. She's unraveling, she whispered, pushing buyers to close without inspections, huge discounts for cash deals. I think she's even forging signatures on disclosure forms. She handed me a flash drive. I copied everything. before she could delete it in emails and voices. Even one where she tells Jim to use substandard materials to cut costs. Then she pulled out a red folder labeled confidential. And this is about Project Clean Sweep. I opened it, heart pounding. She's planning to demolish the original section of Emerald Heights, the part where your aunt's home used to be. My stomach twisted. Why? Because of the contamination, Allison said grimly. She wants to use it as an excuse to condemn the properties and buy them back at below market value. Then she builds a luxury resort on the ashes. I clenched my fists. So let me get this straight. She pollutes the land, uses that pollution to force people out, and then profits off redevelopment. Allison nodded. Exactly. And she's been using HOA funds to bribe environmental inspectors to look the other way. That night I stayed up piecing it all together. I created a flowchart mapping Melanie's empire, shell companies, fake development firms, offshore accounts. By midnight, I had traced links to 3 city council members, 2 state legislators, and a federal judge. This wasn't just local fraud. It was a network of corruption stretching across state lines. But even networks have a weakness. They're only as strong as their weakest link. My phone rang. Special Agent David Chen. Mr. Jordan, we've been monitoring the situation. We'd like to meet 2 hours later. I was seated in a nondescript federal office. On the wall, a massive evidence board, photos, names, timelines, wire diagrams. At the center, Melanie Ross and Jim Harrison. We've been building a case against Harrison for 18 months, Chen said. But Melanie, she was always too careful until now. He pointed to a photograph of a polished man with silver hair, Senator William Thornton. We believe he's been giving them political cover in exchange for campaign donations. My stomach turned. The senator, I whispered. Allison heard Melanie mention him. Exactly, Chen said. Your evidence could be the keystone, but we need you to do something risky. The plan, I would meet with Melanie where a wire offer to settle. Try to draw out a verbal admission of the broader conspiracy. She's smart, I warned. She'll smell a trap. Chen gave a thin smile. That's why we'll make her think she's winning. The trap was set for Friday afternoon, but on Thursday night it nearly fell apart. Jim Harrison was smarter or more paranoid than we'd given him credit for. After hours at the HOA office, he cornered Allison. You're a spy, aren't you? He snarled, grabbing her arm. You think we haven't dealt with problems like Graham? Before, what Jim didn't know was that Allison's phone was already recording every word, every threat, and then the final nail in his coffin. You don't get it, he barked. The senator will bury all of you. This whole town belongs to us. No legitimate real estate operation processes this many sales this fast, I muttered, scanning the documents again. Not without cutting corners, a lot of corners. Patricia nodded solemnly. This is classic fraudulent conveyance, she said. She's trying to flood the system with enough individual property claims that untangling them becomes legally impossible. It's an asset protection strategy, but so sloppy it's actually producing more evidence. Later that day, at a secluded truck stop diner on the outskirts of town, Allison slid into the booth, eyes scanning the lot before she spoke. She's unraveling, she whispered, pushing buyers to close without inspections. Huge discounts for cash deals. I think she's even forging signatures on disclosure forms. She handed me a flash drive. I copied everything. Before she could delete it, emails, invoices, even one where she tells Jim to use substandard materials to cut costs. Then she pulled out a red folder labeled confidential. And this is about Project Clean Sweep. I opened it, heart pounding. She's planning to demolish the original section of Emerald Heights, the part where your aunt's home used to be. My stomach twisted. Because of the contamination, Allison said grimly. She wants to use it as an excuse to condemn the properties and buy them back at below market value. Then she builds a luxury resort on the ashes. I clenched my fists. So let me get this straight. She pollutes the land, uses that pollution to force people out, and then profits off redevelopment. Allison nodded. Exactly. And she's been using HOA funds to bribe environmental inspectors to look the other way. That night, I stayed up piecing it all together. I created a flowchart mapping Melanie's empire, shell companies, fake development firms, offshore accounts. By midnight, I had traced links to 3 city council members, 2 state legislators, and a federal judge. This wasn't just local fraud. It was a network of corruption stretching across state lines. But even networks have a weakness. They're only as strong as their weakest link. My phone rang. Special Agent David Chen. Mr. Jordan, we've been monitoring the situation. We'd like to meet 2 hours later. I was seated in a nondescript federal office, on the wall a massive evidence board, photos, names, timelines, wire diagrams. At the center, Melanie Ross and Jim Harrison. We've been building a case against Harrison for 18 months, Chen said. But Melanie, she was always too careful. Until now. He pointed to a photograph of a polished man with silver hair. Senator William Thornton. We believe he's been giving them political cover in exchange for campaign donations. My stomach turned. The senator, I whispered. Allison heard Melanie mention him. Exactly, Chen said. Your evidence could be the keystone, but we need you to do something risky, the plan. I would meet with Melanie where a wire offered to settle. Try to draw out a verbal admission of the broader conspiracy. She's smart, I warned. She'll smell a trap. Chen gave a thin smile. That's why we'll make her think she's winning. The trap was set for Friday afternoon, but on Thursday night, it nearly fell apart. Jim Harrison was smarter or more paranoid than we'd given him credit for. After hours at the HOA office, he cornered Allison. You're a spy, aren't you? He snarled, grabbing her arm. You think we haven't dealt with problems like Graham before? What Jim didn't know was that Allison's phone was already recording. Every word, every threat, and then the final nail in his coffin. You don't get it, he barked. The senator will bury all of you. This whole town belongs to us. I don't know what you're talking about, Melanie stammered, but her security guards exchanged anxious glances. I held up my phone. Really? Because I have a very interesting email where you talk about permanently solving the Brennan problem with someone named Victor. That's when it happened. One guard reached for his gun. The warehouse doors exploded open. FBI hands where we can see them. Agents stormed the space, weapons raised. Melanie screamed and tried to bolt, but there was nowhere to run. She went down screaming as they cuffed her. You set me up, she shrieked. You'll pay for this. I stepped forward. Actually, I think you're the one who's going to pay. And that money you brought, it's marked, serial numbers were traced back to the HOA account right after Jim withdrew it. As they dragged her out, she turned one last time, her voice venomous. You don't understand, this is bigger than me. They'll come after you. I watched the FBI car disappear into the night, whoever they were. That was a problem for another day. Tonight, justice had finally arrived. By morning, the story had exploded. 3 city council members resigned before noon. Senator Thornton's office issued a blanket denial of any ties to the Emerald Heights scandal. Sure, I thought. Just like you'll deny ever seeing those campaign contributions. The federal courthouse was packed for Melanie's preliminary hearing. The government wasn't pulling punches. 37 criminal counts. Fraud, money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy. Jim Harrison had been caught trying to cross the Mexican border with a fake passport. Under pressure, he rolled fast, agreeing to testify against Melanie for a reduced sentence. But the real bombshell. The prosecutor confirmed they were investigating a sitting U.S. senator for corruption. When I took the stand on day 3, the courtroom was electric. The defense, Richard Blackstone, the infamous Shark. Impeccable. 3,000 suit venom in his smile. He strutted forward. Mr. Jordan, he said smoothly. Isn't it true that you have a personal vendetta against my client? That this elaborate sting was motivated by revenge? I didn't blink. No, counselor. I orchestrated this to expose a criminal enterprise that stole millions from innocent families. The only extortion here was committed by your client. Blackstone's grin didn't waver. You claim to be a forensic accountant, and yet you wore a wire, pretended to take a bribe. How is that different from entrapment? At the prosecution table, Allison slid a note to the U.S. attorney. Objection, Your Honor, the prosecutor said. Rising, the defendant initiated the bribe. The recording proves it sustained, Judge Carter said firmly. But Blackstone wasn't done. He kept pressing, painting me as an opportunist. He gave me a stage, and I used it to walk the court through every transaction, forgery, offshore, shell, and illegal land seizure. And then I dropped the hammer. Your Honor, I said, stepping forward. I'd like to direct the court's attention to Whitmore v. Henderson, 1896. Blackstone sprang up. Relevance. This is a century-old case about property disputes. Judge Carter raised a hand. I'll allow it. Continue. Mr. Jordan, I pulled out a leather-bound law book, part theater, part firepower, in Whitmore v. Henderson. The court ruled that any structure built on private land without explicit permission becomes the property of the landowner, and regardless of investment or intent. That precedent was reaffirmed in Morrison v. State 1952 and Consolidated Developers v. Williams 1998. The courtroom went silent. Further, Arizona Revised Statute 42-173 clearly states that improvements made in bad faith cannot be claimed by the trespasser. It includes fraudulent conveyance as grounds for forfeiture. Blackstone was flipping pages in a frenzy. Your Honor, this is absurd. These are obscure, outdated laws. Actually, Judge Carter said, Whitmore v. Henderson was cited just last year in Peterson v. Maricopa County. Please continue, Mr. Jordan. I looked Blackstone dead in the eye. Combining these precedents with clear fraud, we established that Melanie Ross unintentionally transferred ownership of all 120 homes to me. The rightful landowner, gasps echoed through the courtroom. Even the prosecution team blinked. Allison's eyebrows lifted. She hadn't expected me to play that card so soon. Blackstone's face darkened. This is preposterous. You are saying my client built an entire neighborhood only to lose it on a technicality. It's not a technicality, I said. It's the law. The same law your client tried to manipulate for profit. Melanie, pale and sweating, gripped Blackstone's arm and hissed loud enough for the court reporter to catch it. Do something. Call the senator. If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. The gavel slammed. Order, Judge Carter barked. Ms. Ross, you will refrain from making threats in my courtroom. But it was too late. The FBI raided Senator Thornton's office within hours. In the courtroom's final stretch, I laid out the environmental charges like a final nail in Melanie Ross's gilded coffin. Your Honor, I began, this evidence shows that Mrs. Ross paid off environmental inspectors to overlook contamination. So severe, the land was never suitable for residential development without remediation. I turned to the jury. The irony, in her rush to profit, Ms. Ross increased her own liability exponentially under the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. She is now personally responsible for cleanup, costs estimated at over $30 million. Blackstone made one last desperate move. Your Honor, he said, standing tall, even if we accept Mr. Jordan's dubious interpretation of property law, surely the innocent homeowners who bought in good faith still have some rights. Exactly what I'd been waiting for. Absolutely, Counselor, I replied smoothly, which is why I propose the following. Each home will be sold back to its current occupant at their original purchase price, minus any fraudulent fees or kickbacks. All proceeds will be placed into a victim restitution fund and environmental remediation trust. Judge Carter leaned forward and nodding. A remarkably equitable solution, Mr. Jordan. She turned to the prosecution. Does the government object to incorporating this into a potential plea agreement? No objection, Your Honor, said the lead prosecutor. In fact, we believe Mr. Jordan's framework could be a model for resolving future cases involving systematic HOA fraud. Melanie suddenly shot to her feet, her chair crashing behind her. This is a kangaroo court, she screamed. You're all in on it. The senator promised me protection. Her outburst sealed her fate. The judge ordered her removed from the courtroom and revoked her bail. As calm returned, I presented my final piece of evidence, a financial spiderweb diagram. Over the past 5 years, approximately $47 million flowed through a network of shell companies controlled by Ms. Ross. These are the hallmarks of classic money laundering operations. Judge Carter called a recess to review the evidence. When court reconvened, her ruling was swift. Based on the overwhelming evidence, particularly Ms. Ross's own statements made in this courtroom, I find sufficient grounds to proceed with all charges. I also grant the plaintiff's motion regarding property ownership subject to the restitution plan Mr. Jordan outlined. As we stepped out of the courthouse, Allison turned to me. That was brilliant. How long have you been planning this? I smiled. Since the day I found Whitmore v. Henderson. Sometimes the best trap is the one your enemy builds themselves. Melanie was so focused on exploiting technicalities, she never thought they'd be used against her. That night, the evening news showed Melanie in handcuffs ranting about conspiracies as she was led into a waiting van. The headline, HOA President's Greed Becomes Her Prison. Landmark case sets national precedent. 3 months later, sentencing. The courtroom was packed. Once again, Judge Carter's tone was icy. Ms. Ross, you betrayed the trust of hundreds of families, corrupted public institutions, and disregarded both law and decency. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel fell. I thought of Aunt Margaret. She'd been right all along. Justice could be served if someone was willing to see what others missed. Sometimes the best revenge isn't living well. Sometimes it's turning their own weapon against them. So months later. Resolution, Melanie Ross, 25 years. No parole at sentencing. She stood as a shadow of her former self. I let greed blind me, she said softly. I destroyed lives. I can never make full amends. But I hope my cooperation brings down others like me. And it did. Her testimony helped dismantle a 12-state fraud network involving over 200 corrupt officials. Jim Harrison, 15 years reduced sentence. He cooperated early, turning over financial records that helped recover $30 million. The real earthquake. Senator William Thornton's trial. Once a kingmaker, now the face of American political corruption. His fall was Shakespearean. As for the 120 homes, we kept it simple. Each buyer got their home back at the price they originally paid minus all junk fees. The cleanup was completed using the recovered funds. The land's value soared once news of the natural gas deposits spread. But I'd already made arrangements. The mineral rights placed in a community trust. Profits fund, local schools, and environmental programs for the next 50 years. And Connell Lewis, my childhood neighbor, he was unanimously elected as the new Emerald Heights HOA president. This time, the right person was in charge. Epilogue. What took root? Connell Lewis's first act as HOA president was to rewrite the bylaws, ensuring transparency, mandatory audits, and supermajority approval for all major decisions. Never again, he told me one morning over coffee. This is going to be a community, not a scheme. And it was. Where there had once been suspicion, there was now solidarity. Block parties replaced HOA disputes. The community garden flourished ironically right where Melanie's marble-clad office used to stand. Allison West's trajectory changed overnight. The young lawyer, once blacklisted for doing the right thing, became the nation's go-to expert on property fraud. She opened her own firm, specializing in defending homeowners against predatory HOAs. Within a year, she had offices in 3 states and a client waitlist months long. I owe it all to your aunt, she told me one afternoon. She saw something in me worth saving. And she had. We'd uncovered more of Aunt Margaret's letters, hidden deep in the house and garden, meticulously documenting Melanie's corruption. She hadn't lived to see the case won, but she'd built the foundation we stood on. Former Judge Harold Winter's testimony turned out to be another matchstick in the bonfire. His confession led to a massive DOJ investigation that indicted 17 judges across 6 states. Hundreds of wrongful foreclosures were overturned. Winter died peacefully 3 months later. Redeemed and finally at peace, his funeral was packed. Many who attended had once feared him. Now they came to thank him. The ripple effects continued. State legislatures across the country passed new HOA protection laws. The Jordan Amendment required verified multi-channel notification before any HOA could take action against a homeowner's rights. Law schools added courses on HOA abuse and real estate fraud, and the Emerald Heights case became required reading in legal ethics classes. On the anniversary of Melanie's arrest, I stood in the new community center, addressing a crowd of residents, local officials, and press. This victory doesn't belong to me, I said, scanning the crowd. It belongs to everyone who stood up, spoke out, and refused to let corruption win. To my Aunt Margaret, who saw this storm coming and planted the seeds of justice, and to this community for choosing unity over division and truth over convenience. After the speeches, as laughter and music echoed through the plaza, I wandered toward a familiar spot. Where my aunt's wildflower field had once swayed in the wind, there now stood a playground full of children's laughter. Parents chatted on benches, no longer worried about mysterious fees or threatened foreclosures. Connell joined me, handing me a cold beer. You know, Graham, he said, glancing around, when you first showed up, some of us thought you were the enemy. He gestured to the scene, families laughing, neighbors connecting. Now look at this place, I smiled. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across Emerald Heights, I thought back on everything from that shocking first morning to this moment of peace. The forensic accountant in me appreciated the clean symmetry, liabilities resolved, justice balanced, but the human being in me, I found a deeper joy in what had grown from the ashes, a community, strong, transparent, unshakable. And on the breeze, I could almost hear her. Well done, Graham. Well done indeed. The wildflowers were gone, but something even better had bloomed. Final thoughts in the end, Melanie Ross had been right about one thing. She fell into a trap, but not one I had set. It was the one she built herself. Every forged signature, every fraudulent deed, every family she tried to destroy. And when those bricks collapsed under their own weight, Justice struck back with poetic precision. The very laws she twisted became the ones that condemned her. If you're watching this and you've ever felt powerless in the face of HOA abuse, corrupt developers, or rigged systems, remember this: document everything. Most question authority. Unite, speak, resist. Because when ordinary people rise together, even the mightiest Goliaths can fall. This wasn't just my victory. It was ours. The victory of every person who's ever stood up against a rigged system and refused to stay silent.